thank you for choosing to watch this video. I know that there are millions of other videos on YouTube that you could choose to watch, so I don't take it lightly that you have chosen this one. I would like to give our typical disclaimer that these true crime videos discuss some very disturbing and sensitive topics, including homicide, assault, and abuse in varying degrees. I want you to prioritize your mental health, and so if any of these topics are triggering for you now or at any time in the video, please, please, please exit and take care of yourself. For those of you that are true crime loving angel babies like myself, I invite you to stay, to relax, and enjoy. So today we will be talking about a young woman that left her home one night to use a payphone nearby to call her long-distance boyfriend. But when she hung up the phone, nobody would ever hear from her again or ever see her alive. This story is about Elaine Nix, who was born on December 17th of 1980. She grew up in the town of Gainesville, Georgia, which was a rural community. It was predominantly a blue-collar population, and it was known to many people as the Queen City of the mountains because of its breathtaking views and nature-based attractions like mountain bike racing, hiking, and kayaking. In 1998, at the age of 18, Elaine was in that stage of life between being an adult and a teenager. That's a confusing time for a young woman, young man, whatever you identify as. That is a tough time of life. At least it was for me. So I think back on what it was like being an 18-year-old, and I think of who Elaine was based off what I've read, and it sounds like, despite there being some challenges along the way, she transitioned from the teenage life to adulthood well, for the most part. She was a beautiful young woman with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, standing at 5 feet 2 inches tall. Elaine's best friend, Jennifer Boyd, who to this day continues advocating for justice in Elaine's case, was a year older than her, and they instantly connected when they met through a mutual friend. They attended high school together at East Hall High School. They often spent their time together like typical teenage girls do. They would have sleepovers, they would gossip, spill the tea, just hang out, do girl stuff. They even took part in a pageant together called the Miss Valhalla pageant. And overall, just given the descriptions of Elaine provided by her friends and family, it was clear that she was small but mighty. You know, she was in this tiny little frame, but she had a big personality and she was powerful. She worked as was a hostess at the Up the Creek restaurant, which wasn't that far away from her home. She would typically work there at nights, and then would spend after that the time talking to her boyfriend on the phone. Her boyfriend's name is Billy Millwood, and he lived out of the area, so they were in a long-distance relationship. Typically, Elaine would use a payphone outside of Zach's food rack, which was like a little convenience store market, which was across from a desolate railroad track on Candler Road in Gainesville. Lush bushes covered this area behind the store, and there were no houses, businesses, or even stop signs that could be seen from this lot. Next to the lot, behind all of this dense, overgrown forestry, was a trailer park and a lake, and the payphone booth was located all the way at the edge of the parking lot. Now, given the time of the year, the weather for the night most likely consisted of temperatures in the low 60s, with likely an overcast sky hiding the half moon. That night, when she and Billy spoke on the phone, the conversation would last about an hour, and after the phone call ended, Elaine vanished. Now you might ask, why was this 18-year-old girl using the payphone to call her boyfriend rather than use the phone at home where it was safe? However, the reason for that is because using the home phone became too expensive. She preferred to use the payphone because it was significantly cheaper to use for long-distance calls, costing only 35 cents to make a call for an unlimited amount of time. The drive from her house was not far to this payphone, and she drove to this one regularly, so overall she felt pretty safe. Billy lived in Cleveland, Ohio, so quite a ways away from Elaine in Gainesville. And according to Billy, during the investigation process, he expressed that they had had an hour-long conversation about an upcoming trip, and they had said their goodbyes on the phone to reconnect when he returned. Now, phone records were able to ultimately confirm his claims. Elaine was last seen on September 20th when she took off at 11 o'clock after her shift to go make this phone call. Elaine's mother did share with police that Elaine and her boyfriend Billy were regularly kind of in this weird cycle of breaking up and getting back together, which I wouldn't say is necessarily uncommon, but that particular evening, it kind of seemed as if they were on their way out of their relationship again. Elaine would get some unsettling pager messages from Billy from time to time, with some unkind messages, I would say. And even though the nature of their conversation that night was talking about his upcoming trip and things seemed okay for the most part, Elaine's mother really did feel like they were on their way to another breakup. So, despite all of that, I doubt Elaine thought or had any inkling that she was going to be kidnapped and murdered. I'm sure it was more thinking about her young officer found the vehicle's windows were down, with the keys still in the ignition, and he noticed that the hood of the car still felt warm, so it couldn't have been just sitting there for that long. Despite this suspicious finding, the officer decided to leave the car there because at that time there had been no reports of a missing vehicle, a stolen vehicle, or a missing person. So we just let it go. Now, Elaine's parents, Becky and David Nix, were not too concerned when Elaine did not come home that night, saying that she would often stay over at friends' houses. Yes, she was 18 years old. Yes, she's technically an adult legally, but I cannot imagine parents not being alarmed that they did not hear from their child. I know that my parents, when I was 18 living under their roof still, I still had to communicate with them if I wasn't coming home. I know that if I did not communicate that to them and just stayed out all night and didn't tell them, they would have absolutely freaked out. They would have called my friends. They would have probably called the police. You know, they would have been alarmed by that. So I find it interesting that Becky and David didn't seem too bothered by this, but hey, that's just me. But the panic started to arrive for Elaine's parents when the following day they are notified that Elaine did not show up for her shift at the Up the Creek restaurant. Now, this was entirely out of character for Elaine. Her family knew at this point that something was terribly wrong. And okay, so maybe she'll go have a sleepover with a friend without telling anybody. But she was not the kind of person that was irresponsible to do like a no-call, no-show at work. So this was the big red flag for her family. So, on the afternoon of September 21st, her family went over to the payphone at Zach's Food Rack, where they immediately saw Elaine's Toyota Celica, but she was nowhere in sight. Something important to note is that Becky Nix notices that Elaine's purse and a packet of cigarettes were lying on the back seat, and the vehicle was still full of gas. The scene was unusual to Becky because she knew that Elaine would never go anywhere without her purse or her cigarettes. She wouldn't do so willingly. So this was also alarming to Becky and made her question if she was taken against her will. She also notices that the only item missing was Elaine's address book. She decides to try to start the car to see if perhaps she was having car trouble and maybe left her car to go get help. But Becky realizes quickly when she tries that the car starts up immediately. The car starts up fine. It has a full tank of gas. So where is she right? Becky then decides to go into the convenience store and ask the sales clerk perhaps, what's the word I'm looking for? Contaminated by mistake. So I think that that is a big problem, which contributes to this being an unsolved case to this day. Now, once Becky and David drive the car home, Becky calls Billy, Elaine's boyfriend, to find out if anything unusual had transpired during their conversation the previous night on their phone call. Billy tells Becky that pretty much everything seemed normal, nothing really out of the blue for them and their relationship. So then, once she hangs up with Billy, she then alerts the police, but was told that because Elaine was 18 years old, unfortunately, they had to wait before filing a missing persons report. So, which we know that this happens, and it totally sucks. It's just really crappy. And I honestly often wonder, when people go missing, does it usually end up that they're truly missing, or that they were just a runaway? I'm really curious because I wonder if they changed the rule on how quickly they can establish somebody is missing, if they would have better luck at finding the person. I don't know. Just thoughts right now. So after notifying the police and finding out they have to wait because she's over 18, they decide to spend the day making flyers of Elaine, which they put up around Hall County. And they launched a search party consisting of family and friends who scoured the neighborhood where Elaine's car had been found. David, however, noticed that when they returned to Zach's food rack later that day, most of the flyers that they had put up had been ripped down, which is so sketchy to me and is very telling that somebody did not want her to be found. Now, when the Nix family was finally able to report that Elaine was missing, it seemed as if the authorities did not take her disappearance seriously. And now y'all know that this is not uncommon. Lord help us, we know that this happens far too much. And I think that this is just one other thing that contributes to why this is still an unsolved case to this day. The police department considered this just another runaway case and gave very little attention to locating Elaine. There was a lieutenant at the Hall County Sheriff's Office at the time by the name of Marty Nix, who was completely unrelated to the family. They just had the same last name. Would insist that his investigative team did what they could to get their hands on any surveillance footage, conducted interviews, and even sent out cadaver dogs on September 22nd, which was 2 days after she went missing. Volunteer search parties looked all throughout the woods and ditches along the highway for the 8 days after her disappearance. The authorities collected surveillance footage from the convenience store and noticed a small, dark-colored pickup truck pulling in around the time Elaine would have been using the phone booth that night. However, it was unknown as to what time the vehicle took off and unfortunately did not lead the police anywhere. On the warm and rainy day of September 29th, a man who had been busy mowing the grass at 3131 Verona Avenue near the industrial park of Beaufort, Georgia, made a gruesome discovery that would shake Gainesville. which we know now to be Elaine Nix. Her body was really found in such bad shape, so medical examiners had to use dental records and the remnants of a small frog tattoo on her ankle and a butterfly on her lower back to determine that it was actually Elaine Nix. Interestingly, when her nude body was found, she had clearly been stripped of all of her clothing. However, her jewelry remained on her body. The jewelry included a black and white beaded necklace and a promise ring from Billy Millwood. The police were able to determine that this was not a robbery because the killer, or the person that abducted her, didn't take any of her belongings. The person left the purse in the back seat and left all the jewelry on, right? So it didn't add up to being a robbery, but this still was an unusual sight to detectives. Now, due to the summer heat of Georgia, decomposition was accelerated, and it became difficult for medical examiners to accurately identify the cause of death. Pathologists were able to determine that it was not a death related to shooting or stabbing, due to there being no significant wounds being present on her body. However, they did think that it could have been death by strangulation. But unfortunately, the 8 days of decomposition removed any clear causes of death, and so the final autopsy report stated the cause of death as undetermined. Elaine's parents remember that she was wearing khaki pants, a white t-shirt, and white and blue tennis shoes that day, all of which were missing and were never recovered. The authorities theorized that perhaps the murder might have been sexually motivated, given that her body was found naked. However, the pathologist did not find any evidence that indicated she was sexually assaulted. The Times news reporters tried to get in contact with the Gwinnett County Police Department, hoping to ask some questions to the detective assigned to Elaine's case, yet the media did not receive any feedback or response to their inquiry despite multiple attempts. As I think is to be expected, many people in the community theorized that Elaine fell victim to an ill-intentioned trucker, given that they were located right off of Interstate 985, which was a common rest stop for truckers. Another theory suggested that Elaine may have seen something she should not have, which would have been motivation to keep her quiet. Drug dealings did happen in the area, and so it wasn't, I guess, unreasonable to think that maybe she saw something and this person silenced her with murder. But what continued to baffle the police was that the killer had left all of Elaine's jewelry on her body. They really could not shake that detail for some reason, but really never found any resolution to it. Lieutenant Marty Nix would even go on to suggest that Elaine must have known the murderer somehow. But again, who knows at this point? Nothing was ever substantiated or determined. One of the biggest problems with this case is that there was very little thoughts that I think a big problem was that Becky and David moved the car before police could do a proper search, proper investigation, collect any evidence that might have been there, looked at the scene, look at the staging, all these things we know happen when there's a crime. That didn't happen with this case, and so I feel like that was really, really bad for the future of solving this case. As mentioned, Elaine's clothes still remain unaccounted for. That payphone no longer exists, and the Nix family ended up moving away to a different state 5 years after Elaine was murdered. Elaine's funeral was a closed casket service due to the condition of her body. Her grave is located in Gainesville, where her friends and family meet every year on September 29th in remembrance of Elaine and to spread awareness about her case, which I think is very, very heartwarming and sweet, but is probably still so painful because there is no resolution. They like to partake in activities in honor of Elaine when they're together, which is sweet. In 2019, when they had this gathering, each attendant wrote a loving message to Elaine on a balloon that was later released into the sky. Becky Nix and friends of Elaine have kept the pieces of jewelry found on Elaine's body as a reminder and motivation to never give up on finding the killer. Whereas Becky and David Nix keep their daughter's jewelry in a bag in their safe, Jennifer Boyd actually wore the black and white beaded necklace for quite some time, especially to Elaine's anniversary memorials. However, she stopped wearing it out of fear that it would break and that she would lose the pieces. Elaine's mother remembered that the day before her daughter disappeared, she returned from church and told her mom that she had rededicated herself to the church and had been forgiven of all her sins. I'm choosing to include that detail because for some reason that part kind of struck a chord in me. Like, was there something in her past that nobody knew about, or was there something in her current life that nobody knew about? It was the phrase that she had been forgiven for all of her sins. Did she get into something that would that's the wrong word, that would motivate somebody to harm her? I could totally be reading into that the wrong way, and it really could be as innocent as a girl that went to church, and being atoned for your sins is a Christianity thing, but something isn't sitting right with me, and it's just something that I'm pondering. Obviously there's nothing to base that off of because there's such limited information about this case, which is so problematic, but that's just my thought. I'm curious what you think on that one. In 2019, the media did inquire with Jennifer Boyd as to why, after all this time, she persists in the efforts of finding the killer. And her response is that she felt as though if the tables were turned, and if it was Jennifer that had been murdered, that Elaine would have done the very same for her. On February 9th of 2005, Elaine's case was broadcasted on the Montel Williams show due to the efforts of her mother and Jennifer. During the show, there was a psychic on by the name of Sylvia Brown who was brought reaching out to psychics or mediums or whatever for any reason, you do you, boo. But in this kind of a situation, it is such a vulnerable time. It's offensive to give such vague answers that, you know, like, give such vague answers, or I don't know, prove that you don't know what you're doing or that you're not capable of what you're claiming, I guess is what I'm gonna say. Like, don't take advantage of people in their lowest times. Like, I get that you're on a TV show, but ooh, that does not sit well with me. Becky has mentioned that since the advancement of forensic technology, the family has considered exhuming Elaine's body in an attempt to hopefully find more clues that would lead them to a suspect. In 2005, a private investigator, Hal Lauder Jr., was brought on board, and he started looking into Elaine's case and worked on it for 2 years. He reread and reviewed all of the case files information and conducted new interviews with friends and family. He believed that the location where Elaine's body was found actually played a significant role, and that there could have been a connection to the people who were familiar with that area. The isolated industrial park would have been an odd choice if her body was just to be dumped there in a panic. You know, there wasn't a whole lot around, so somebody would have had to, like, really drive out there to dump it. So he thought something transpired around that area, or that this was planned all along to drop her body there once she had been murdered. There were some letters that accused 3 individuals of Elaine's murder, one of which was allegedly a landlord, and they were meant to be sent to Becky and Jennifer, but ended up being sent to the wrong address. The person that received these letters ended up handing them over to investigators at the Hall County Police Department, who later confirmed that the disturbingly graphic information laid out in each letter did not correspond with the real evidence of Elaine's case. So, which is so sad, but these letters were really just a hoax at the family's expense. It was a cruel joke, according to police. But then again, I know that the evidence didn't completely match up and align, but I'm just like, was this the killer? Was the killer playing a joke? There is such little information, it almost leaves all of this room for crazy theories, and that could be one of them. I don't know. But as was expected, there were tons of rumors surrounding this case. Just like I said, there's so many avenues you can take this. Some people speculated that Billy was involved in her murder, but the police, after their investigation, did not think that he was a part of this, although he had been in and out of incarceration due to drugs. Fingers were pointed at many other individuals in the Gainesville community, but all lacked sufficient evidence to make an arrest. As we know, Elaine dropped out of high school in 1999, but she had always dreamed of becoming a registered nurse. She was described as vibrant and spunky, and when I think of Elaine, from what I've read, what's that quote? Like, though she may be little, she is fierce, or something like that. That's what I think of when I think of Elaine. She was tiny and small, but she was like dynamite. She had a heart of gold, and she would do anything for anyone, which is how Jennifer described her. Just some little fun facts about her. She had an adoration for frogs. She had many frog toys and paraphernalia that could be found around her house. She just thought frogs were so cute. Elaine's things were boxed up and stored in one of the back rooms of the Nix family's new home. And their goal was to ensure that the family remembered her as the vibrant 18-year-old she was. Spending their years after her death almost frozen in time, David Nix commented during an interview in 2017 saying, quote, "It's like you don't believe she's gone. You're just waiting on her to come home." End quote. One of the hardest things for Elaine's family as they have moved through this tragedy and have tried to come to grips with no closure whatsoever is that, you know, her family has moved on, her siblings have moved on, and her brother had children, and Elaine never got to meet her two nieces and nephew. You know, it's like this piece is always missing, and their family is expanding in one way, but then on this other side of the family it stopped. You know, it's not ever going to move forward. And after all these years, no suspect has been identified. The advanced decomposition of her corpse presented many unanswerable questions. To my knowledge at this time, the family did not exhume the body, but even with the DNA that they did have, you know, no answers have come about. It's like she's just forever stuck in time. And I just struggle with stuff like this because, you know, we talk about true crime and, you know, when something like this tragically happens, there's some level of resolve when the family can get answers, or, you know, somebody is determined a suspect, and so then there's a trial and there's conviction, and that offers a level of justice and resolve and closure. You know, that doesn't change what happened, it doesn't make it better, but I think it offers a sense of relief in a way. And so when you have families like the Nix that don't get anything, they have no clear answers, there's no conviction, there's no justice, so they're left in this like space of like, I guess, unresolved. I feel like that can be maddening to people, and I just